Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari. You are watching on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and listening on U97.5 FM radio. We want to join our guests now, Mr. Vishi, Dr. Vishi Beharry, who is head of the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association. How are you, Dr. Beharry?
Good morning,
Good
Mr. Tiwari, and
morning.
thank you very much. I'm quite fine, a little bit tired. You know, we have had a long 3 months, but it's well
Let's
otherwise.
begin. You jumped into it in a sense, so let's talk about that a little bit. Could we raise the volume so we can hear him better, please? What have you been doing for the last 3 months? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, just about 3 months ago, we were asked to get more involved in the vaccination drive or vaccination initiative being rolled out by the Ministry of Health. I would just go back a little before that. In January of this year, when I was inaugurated as the president of the Medical Association, the Minister of Health indicated at our inauguration ceremony that there is going to be a need for medical professionals and healthcare workers to assist in vaccinations, and he indicated that he was calling on the medical association to do so. And then around February, he asked us to see what we can do. So we came together as the association and we put forward a proposal to the ministry that outlined 3 phases of vaccinations. One would have been a drive-through vaccination, one would have been a mass vaccination, and one would have been a community outreach vaccination. And we basically indicated that as healthcare workers, we're willing to support. We know that we are all in this together to get out of this pandemic. We understand that vaccination is the way to slow the spread of the virus, and we were quite willing to support. As a non-governmental, non-profit organization, the Medical Association was willing to support. And so we crafted that proposal and forwarded it to the ministry in February. Around April month, when vaccines became available, we were called upon to join in. And we started off by supporting the RHA vaccination drive. So when there was the operationalization of Paddock and SAPA and some of these other mass vac sites, Medical Association joined in. We provided medical doctors. We partnered with the Nursing Association, the TTRNA, and we provided doctors and nurses to support the execution of these vaccination drives. All of the other logistics were organized by the RHAs. And quite successfully, the first drive, we were able to do something like about 2,100 persons vaccinated in one day. And subsequent to that, in end of May, early June, there was a need now with more vaccines being available. There was a need to expand the mass vaccination drives to get more people vaccinated. And the Manufacturers Association were called upon as one of the first organizations to do so. And they stepped up, and then the ministry now made the connection and the link between Manufacturers Association and the Medical Association, as we had offered that support. And we came together as a team and we said, we will get this thing started. And we literally had about 48 to 72 hours to pull together our very first vaccination drive. And that was on June 6th. So just around the beginning of June, we started planning. Of course, the Medical Association provided the medical volunteers. The Manufacturers Association provided all of the other logistical arrangements. But then we still needed other volunteers, non-medical volunteers. And of course, we chose the Diwali Nagar site to do so. And Sewa International TT being one of the organizations in the forefront in terms of supplying volunteers and doing voluntary work. We approached Sewa and they quite voluntarily agreed to support the drive. So we formed a really solid team with these 3 organizations, and we started off this mass vaccination drive at Diwali Nagar. And on the first day, we did close to 2,500 vaccinations, first dose vaccinations in one day. And that is a significant achievement because there was always a limiting factor of the observation time of half an hour. Um, and that would have been your bottleneck or your limiting factor in terms of how quickly you can vaccinate and how quickly you can turn over people out of the vaccination site. Having the space that we had at the Diwali Nagar worked in our favor as it allowed us to have a really large vaccination room. And it just took off from there. We continued, there was more vaccines available. We continued Manufacturers Association when the ministry saw the success of what we were doing as a team. They then sent across to us other associations, so Banking Association, Security Companies Association, um, Telecom, different groups that were allocated vaccines now approached us as a unit, the Medical Association and say we're partnering to run and operate this mass vaccination site. We were now approached to vaccinate the people in those sectors, the employees and their families and so on. So what would happen is that the relevant group or association, this is for the first month or so, the relevant group or association that we were partnering with to vaccinate their sector would do the appointment bookings and they would handle the registration and the entry of persons into the site. Once they would have cleared those persons to enter the site, and then we are now satisfied that these persons were due for vaccination. Then we would have gone through the medical screening process now. So we verify their information, ID, registration, etc. And then we screen them medically to figure out if they are eligible for the vaccines. There were some few contraindications to receiving the vaccines, things like the breastfeeding, having had COVID recently, and so on. So we'd have done our screening, and then we took them through the vaccination room, and then they got their vaccines, and then the observation period, and so on. So the whole interior operations of the Diwali Nagar site, interior meaning from just after entry of the site till exit, were managed by the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association and Sewa International TT. And that process just got refined day after day. Every time we had an operation, we refined it. We probably made at least a dozen changes to our system. But like Sewa will always say, we try to build and create systems that work. And it is that connection and partnership between the Medical Association and Sewa International TT that allowed us to just evolve as a vaccination site. And it continued to evolve. As time went on, our numbers went up. When we came to second doses, our largest number of vaccinations done at that site on any given day in second doses was 6,635.
In a single day?
And in a single day. That is a single 9 to 9.5 hour period.
Yes.
And in first dose vaccinations, where the observation period is a little bit longer, it was 3,100. Yes. So we have pushed our limits, we have pushed our capacity by developing systems at a vaccination site that work. Systems that work, systems that will allow us to deliver safe vaccinations. I will never say that we had a very perfect system. There were little kinks and little faults in the system, little loopholes, things where that slipped through. But once we recognized those, we mitigated against it.
Yes.
And so we were able to run a successful drive. As at 31st of August, the site has been shut down. On Independence Day was our last operations. We did just over 1,500 vaccinations. And we would have moved from vaccinating with one brand of vaccine to a system that allowed us to vaccinate with 3 different brands of vaccines at the same time.
At the same time.
So, at the same time, so we vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Sinopharm. Yes. And so we had 3 streams, allowing people that option to choose. Well, of course, the Pfizer was within a certain category, so you had to be pregnant, healthcare worker, or teacher. But for the others, it allowed people to choose, and it allowed us, for instance, if somebody had a contraindication because of a medical reason, to offer them another brand of vaccine that they can perhaps have. Um, some who would have come for Johnson & Johnson, for instance, and may have been breastfeeding, could have had the option of getting the Sinopharm. And so we were able to offer that. As of 31st of August 2021, when the site was closed, we would have administered 80,000 jabs in that 3-month period. We would have done over 50,000 volunteer hours. We would have had over 724 medical volunteers, unique medical volunteers, pass through that site, and over 519 non-medical volunteers pass through that site. Even if some of them would have volunteered for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days, we would have counted those numbers. And so we would have engaged over 1,200 persons to volunteer. And that is a key point for us because this site was a completely voluntary site. Unlike many other sites, while there were volunteers at many other mass vaccination sites, we were the only site that was completely 100% voluntary. And of course, we had some challenges at times when other sites were opened up and persons were being paid to work at the sites and so on. It depleted our volunteer resource. But once again, we put out a push there and we continued to show what our systems were doing. And we were able to achieve it still. Even with smaller numbers, people worked harder and we were able to achieve it. And so I must, as I said on Tuesday night to our volunteers, I salute our volunteers. None of this could have been done by the Association of SEWA without the people on the ground. We have also had some very generous sponsors for Citizens Bank and Republic Bank. As you know, operations like that don't cost
They're very
$0.
costly. That's right.
There are things that we would have had to pay for. And we had generous donations from the banking sector. In the early days, the associations would have covered the cost, the Manufacturers Association, banking, and security companies, and so on. So we would have had the opportunity to get that cost covered. But key to that sponsorship, without the volunteers and the money, we couldn't get it done. And even the other way around, with the volunteers and no money, we couldn't get it done. So both sponsors and volunteers are valued equally and gave human service in this initiative. Unfortunately, and people have asked the questions at least 100 times since Tuesday, why? Why shut down? I think it's a difficult question to answer, but perhaps we have to look at it similar to a business model. If there's a cost attached, despite how many volunteer availability there is to continue and how many vaccines there are to continue, if you are not getting the customers and you're putting out the funding, then you're doing something wrong in that business model. And what has been happening is that the number of persons showing up for vaccinations have declined. For many different reasons. There's brand preference issue, there's a vaccine hesitancy issue, there's simple things like transport. And so we started to look at why is it our numbers were declining, and we started using our systems used in SEWA to get out to the communities and get feedback from persons as to why they're not showing up for the vaccinations. And we learned that the biggest challenge was getting to the site. So these mass numbers that we have vaccinated, this 80,000 persons we vaccinated, they were able to get to the site. They were able to get transport and get to the site to be vaccinated and spend the time there. No one spent longer than about 45 minutes to an hour to go through the entire process. There were days, however, little hiccups happened and some people waited 2, 3, maybe 4 hours maximum from start to finish. But once those issues were rectified, they moved through the system quickly. And so we had to take the tough decision to close down the site because the numbers of vaccinations for the operating cost was not making any sense, and we would soon run out of funding, or soon have run out of funding to be able to continue the operations of the site. And even though perhaps we could have asked for more funding, what we recognize is that even getting that more funding is not necessarily going to allow us to vaccinate more people.
Yes.
Because then you are opening a site at cost of X dollars to vaccinate 100, 150 persons, when that X dollars can actually vaccinate 2,500 to 3,000 persons.
Yes.
So unfortunately, that is where we are at, and we are now looking at systems in terms of where there's the need in the community, for instance, to figure out where do we go next.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Dr. Beharry, for that very informed and insightful overview of what happened in this private sector collaboration between the Trinidad and Tobago, the Medical Association of Trinidad and Tobago, SEWA TT, the Manufacturers Association, and a whole host of volunteers. I want to ask you some questions, and I hope you'll give me quick and sharp answers to them. For instance, why do people volunteer? You got 1,200 people to give their time, their energy, their commitment for tremendous cost to themselves and no reward of a tangible nature. Why do they volunteer?
For country. Simple, short answers for country. These 1,200 plus volunteers, they recognize the need in our country at this time. They recognize the need to work together to end this pandemic. And they've all said to us, we will do it again. We are ready to serve because we are all in this together, and we want to support our country in slowing the spread of this virus.
All right. So I mean, there is something to understand and appreciate there then, which is that people respond to all kinds of incentives, including money, including rewards, including prizes, all those kinds of things. But there's something inside of us as human beings that allow us to rise beyond our limited capacities as human beings to be more and to be a better human being. And you were able to tap that in 1,200 people in the country, in the community. Yeah. I think it's important to remember that, not everything takes money and not everything takes a reward. People will do things if they see that it makes sense and that they can provide value. The second thing I want to take from you as a lesson, to get anything done, you need to think it through, right?
Correct.
Secondly, you've got to have structures to allow what you are thinking through to work. In other words, you have to have pegs to put your hat on. Thirdly, you've got to have a system that connects one thing to the other to allow it to work. And finally, you've got to have an execution plan in which resources are mobilized and people fit so that this execution could be expeditious, can be efficient, effective, etc. All of that has to be done. And I think it's important to learn that lesson because, a lot of times people want to do things, they're hot under the collar, they want to get it done, but it really takes some organization, and it starts with thinking. You have to think through what you're doing. You've got to organize the resources, you've got to build the structures, you've got to have the systems. Now that we've created this capacity, though, because that is what you have done,
yes.
What can we deploy this capacity for again? How can we harness it? How can we build on it? How can we make use of it again in a valuable way?
So I will use the explanation simply in the context of vaccination again. This capacity was built out for the purpose of vaccination, but
Yes.
the systems and the base foundation upon which this capacity was built was done over years, and I'll look at the systems built by Seva International TT. The Seva International TT has done thousands of food packages and hamper packing initiatives for countries under disaster, for our locals in times of disaster. And it is those systems that allow us to quickly adapt our models into something that can work. And so our networks of reaching out to the volunteers, our networks of being able to, our capacity to mobilize resources is what we used as the foundation for this particular project. Now that this phase of the project has come to an end, simply because there isn't such a great demand as there were initially in terms of number of persons to be vaccinated. Now we have recognized the issue of brand preference hesitancy and the issue of vaccine hesitancy on the whole. And then, of course, the challenge of getting to a vaccination site, or the preference of getting to a vaccination site, if I may use that phrase, because you have persons in the community who want to be vaccinated, but prefer not to go to the health center because they fear that they have a perception, false maybe, but they have a perception that going to a healthcare facility in this time of a pandemic will likely get them the virus. And they want to avoid that. So they prefer to go to a site that is not necessarily a healthcare facility to receive the vaccination that they want to get. So we have looked at all of those things, and I'm saying there's no plan at this point, but but these are the discussions happening, and in my view, in my vision, I think perhaps this is where we need to go. We need to start activating that third phase of our proposal in terms of going out into the
The
community and doing
community
outreach,
outreach phase.
community outreach. And it started with the RHAs already. Uptake and numbers might be low, and perhaps it needs to be refined a little bit, but we have tested it out of the Diwali Nagar site operations on 2 occasions. 3 weeks ago, we went out into the Kunupia community, and we did in 2.5 hours, we vaccinated 223 persons. Every single one of those 223 persons were persons who just simply did not have the money to travel to get to Shagwana's Health Center or St. Helena Health Center to get a vaccine, simply did not have the money to travel to Diwali Nagar or UTT to get a vaccine. They don't own a vehicle. They walk. They live in an area there where they access everything to live in that particular area. They just simply can't afford, and we were able to vaccinate those 223 persons, and we went back a second time last weekend and vaccinated them again.
So you are
In fact, the
saying,
second time,
no, go ahead,
in
finish your
fact, the second
sentence.
time what we did was that we utilized transport. We provided transport. We brought them to the Nagar, vaccinated them, and took them back home. And then on Tuesday, again, we did another outreach. This time we went down to Maruga in in collaboration with the Art Society of Mount Hope. So some medical doctors and medical students who would have supported our mass vaccination drive coordinated that initiative, and they were able to, in one day, drive around in Maruga to 7 or 8 different stops and vaccinate 157 persons. Many of them were shut-ins. They were persons who lived in their house, perhaps had an amputation, bedridden in some way, or simply couldn't afford to get to a health center. And
Let me
they were
st-
able to stop and vaccinate these people who were willing to be vaccinated, but just couldn't have the means to get there. So
let
I
me
think
stop
that is where we need to go.
let me stop you there. I think what you are saying is that the same things that you applied for the mass vaccination site,
Correct.
we need to think through and apply here now, because you need the structures, you need
Yes.
the systems, all right? You need the logistical arrangements, you need the organization, you need the capacity, the resources, the deployment of volunteers, etc., in an organized fashion. And I think what you are suggesting is that if we go on a massive outreach program, we might be able to beat this issue of vaccine hesitancy. Because I am amazed that we are only now at 500 and something first shots, and we are only over 400 double doses, fully vaccinated. And we really should be about 700 by now at least. And we've got to do it. I'll give you the last word. We are going to close now. What to do about this vaccine hesitancy? Is it outreach?
I think the answer is outreach, and outreach in the form of having that one-on-one conversation.
Yes.
Many of the persons in that 223 we vaccinated and that 157 we vaccinated, I would say about 80% of those, they simply wanted to have a conversation with a healthcare professional, for somebody who is in healthcare to answer their questions and allay their fears. And many of those persons who were vaccinated in those two outreach initiatives, they simply had questions that needed to be answered. And once those questions were answered, once there was a conversation had between the healthcare professional and the patient, the decision was a done deal. I'm ready to take my vaccine. Do you have it? We had it on site and we gave it to them and they were vaccinated. And that, I think, is going to mop up a significant amount of the vaccine hesitant persons there. And the second aspect of it is that you have to address the brand preference. The brands are here. People have brand preference. There is something called brand preference hesitancy. People are hesitating to take certain brands and prefer to take other brands. And I'm saying we have to eliminate that as well. Even in the concept of outreach, when we go out there, we must be able to offer them the brands, so that the few that have brand preference hesitancy, we will be able to address that by offering them the brand that they want. And so we, in a matter of weeks, we will be able to take that 400,000 up to some more significant numbers if we have this massive outreach as we should have.
All right. We have to have community outreach then. We must have conversations with the skeptics to be able to allay their fears and to convince them. And we must have brand choices to allow them to make what they think is the best decisions for them. I hope the Minister of Health and the Ministry of Health officials are listening. You cannot know what the reality is by sitting in your office and trying to figure it out on the basis of information coming to you. I think the best way to get the information is to find out from the people what are the issues. And we are getting that kind of response here from Dr. Beharry and the Trinidad and Tobago Medical Association. Let's try and do what is required, please. I thank you for listening and watching. This is MCTV U97.5, Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari. Have a great day.